Welcome to the Hidden History Lecture Series with the Bryan Museum. I'm Sam Collins, and today we're going to speak about the Galveston Giant, Jack Johnson, Galveston's most famous native son. You know him for winning the World Heavyweight title in 1908 and becoming the first African American heavyweight champion of the world, but there's so much more to the man and the myth of Jack Johnson. Today we will speak with his great-great-niece, Linda Haywood, and also boxing promoter and manager Bob Spagnola. Tune in for a great program about Galveston's most famous native son, the Galveston Giant, Jack Johnson. Well, I'd like to welcome you here to the Bryan Museum. I am so thankful that you accepted our invitation to talk about the Galveston Giant, Jack Johnson. So today we have Bob Spagnola. If you want to give us a little background of yourself and how you got involved in boxing or your love of boxing.
I grew up in suburban New York, and in the late 60s, 68 and 69, they were funding these CYOs and Police Athletic League boxing programs. They were trying to do something, but I had a love for boxing. My father had watched it, and I fell in love with it and became an amateur boxer myself. And when I realized that I couldn't be a great boxer, I still wanted to be involved in it. And I eventually went to school. My field was accounting, but it's crazy because my father told me, "Oh, go in that accounting." And I said, "But Dad, I hate it." "Oh, but you can always go into something else." And I thought, well, what does he mean? Why would I do that? But eventually I was able to go into the business aspect of the sport that I loved.
So when were you first introduced to Jack Johnson in the history and find out that he's from Galveston, and now you're here from Galveston because you grew up on the East Coast, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I grew up in suburban New York, and I knew about Jack Johnson and his nicknames, which obviously Galveston, the only thing I knew about Galveston was the song by, that it was an island somehow, yeah. And there was a song about it. And then I came down here to visit, to lay on the beach, and then I found the old neighborhoods and the history of the town. So Jack where did he live? And there were several locations, one on Broadway and one, I think, over on 15th or so.
14th, I think, yeah.
That they were, the one on Broadway was like at 8th or 9th, but the one on 14th,
Broadway.
Yeah, 806, right. But those were both supposed to be former residences of he and his family. And even, in Chicago, which I would go there for business and had some fighters up there, Jack was very well recognized of where he had lived and so on and so forth up there, and was a very prominent figure. Johnson was forced out. Ali never had to go overseas because he could get a license there and he couldn't here. But the fact is the fact that he was the heavyweight champion of the world, and everybody in the world, that was a big thing all over the world. When he went to Paris, to Lisbon, when he went to these other countries, he was celebrated and treated, and he was, down on his luck. It wasn't like he had a financial planner or anything when they decided to take his industry away from him. So he went around, and they didn't even really at that time have fighters that could stand up to him. They could even make he was that much heads and tails above a lot of guys. And
I want people to understand that here's Johnson outside of the country after he's lost the title, but he's such an American. Go ahead and share.
He's an American hero, and if this doesn't prove that, then nothing could. Because here he is. He's on the lam of his own country. He's a brilliant, celebrated athlete, and then all of a sudden he's no good, and they want to lock him up. And so he goes to Europe, knowing that they couldn't chase him there. But and I heard this story. That he went to an American embassy, and this was during the First World War, and he, having been very familiar, having worked on the docks, he went to the American embassy, and he he went in and visited with them and told them, listen, that German frigate here in the harbor, it's got an 8-inch gun on it or something. Now he was, for one thing, we all realized this guy was an incredible cerebral guy. This was no lump on a log. This was no, but you know, fighters are stereotyped like everybody else, but it's not generally for a very bright guy like this guy was, a guy with, you know, however many patents with the United States government. Later on, people began to understand. But he went down there. Here he is. He's a great American. He's down there, and he knows the war hadn't really quite started for America, but it was going on for the rest of the world. We came in kind of at the end of it, but here he's sharing this. It's like a secret agent, you know, this information, because he's going around. Everywhere. He's a celebrity. Nobody's
so
thinking this guy.
Nobody's thinking.
And he sees this thing, and then he goes and tells them a very significant aspect of the you know, a military aspect of that.
Giant. Any closing remarks to the audience? Just how important Jack Johnson is to Galveston and to boxing, and any closing remarks you want to share, or any admiration you have for him, or a story. You have was it a book or print or something you have of Jack Johnson? Any memorabilia?
Listen, I have a couple of pieces of memorabilia, and I have that book that I got from my mother, although it's in storage. I need to find it because I want to add that to it. But listen, first off, thank the Bryan Museum. You know, listen, this is part of Galveston history, Texas history, you know, American history, and world history. It's really a huge, and to be at that pinnacle, and then, you know, we're having the benefit of looking back and seeing, you know, how the story unfolded. But and thank you so much for considering me for this. And just, Johnson's been a hero, and the fact that during my lifetime, he's, you know, especially the last 25 years or so, he's really gotten a lot more attention, and I think he'd be very proud of, you know, of that, of the, you know, the guy was a Renaissance man, and really, you know, oftentimes society doesn't appreciate people like that till after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, spoke different languages. Being here in the port city, I'm sure he grew up playing with other kids, and you know, they just absorbed that information. So he picked that up. He played instruments. He's just an incredible native son of the island, and we're so thankful that Bob took the time out to visit with us today. Next, we're going to hear from a relative of Jack Johnson's, his great niece, Linda Haywood, to give you a personal story from the family perspective. We are so thankful that you were able to join us today, and we look forward to talking about more Galveston history in the future. Thanks, Bob.
All the best. Thank you, Sam.
Hello, Miss Linda Haywood. We are so glad to have you with us today to talk about the Galveston Giant, your great uncle, Jack Johnson. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. The Galveston Giant is so important to the history of Galveston, and many individuals know the facts about him winning the heavyweight title and other things about his life, but they don't have the personal family story. So we thought it would be great for everyone tuning in today to hear directly from a family descendant. So if you could tell us a little bit about how you're related to Jack Johnson, and then some of the family history of how you all got to Chicago.
All right. That's a very interesting question, and I'm going to try to give the best answer. So anyway, I am related to Jack Johnson through his sister, Janie Johnson Rhodes. He had two other sisters, but neither of them had children. So Janie was his second oldest sister. Lucy was first, Janie was second, Jack was third, and Fanny was next, I believe, and then his brother Henry. Those were the only ones that lived to be adults. So my great-grandmother Janie married her husband, Augustus Andrew Rhodes, on June 19th, which I later found out was Juneteenth. She married him June 19th, 1893 in Galveston, Texas. So I do believe, based off what I was told, that once he started boxing and making money, one of the things he did was travel to Chicago. So he came to Chicago and he liked it in Chicago. And subsequently, he bought his mother a mansion at 3344 South Wabash. And he and his mother lived there. And his other sisters and brother-in-law and his brother Henry, they were still in Galveston. But his mother, my great-great-grandmother, I'm told she worried the crap out of him until he brought them to Chicago, because he told her, Mama, let them stay where they are. I think he probably knew what was going to happen once they got up here. So you cannot just keep telling your mama, no, she's not going to go for it. So reluctantly, he sent for them and they came up on the train. And when they came up here on the train, man, it was hell to tell the captain, you know. So they he said in a book that he wrote that he said, I really don't talk about my family much because they never figured prominently in my life. However, when they knew he had money, they were spending his money as fast as he was making it. His sister Lucy, Fanny. I don't think his sister Janie, my great grandmother. I wouldn't like to think that she was that she was on the gravy train, but you know, you never know.
But she was married. She was married, and in her family, she had children, and
yeah.
Unlike the others that were not married.
Oh well, his oldest sister, she was kind of like a housekeeper. She did back then what they called day work. And you know, his sister Fanny, she worked at a hat factory. She made hats. Henry was he was a stevedore. That's where you work at a company and you put coal into the stove to keep the place warm. So that's what they called him at the time. And then he was also a shipping clerk. He was a shipping clerk up here in Chicago. They got here at around 1910, I believe it was, because I know it was a flood in Galveston. It was in 1908 or 9, but when after the flood was over, that's when his sisters came here. I do believe his mother was already here, and then they came later. But his sister Janie, back to her, she's the only, well, the other three, all of them were married, but she's the only one that had children. So she had my grandmother, Luella, my aunt Blanche, and she had Gus Rhodes Jr., who became his valet and his chauffeur and secretary. And then she had Arthur Charles Rhodes, that was the baby. So Luella was my grandmother. Luella had my mother, Dorothy, and Dorothy had me. And thank God, I always tell people, thank God that Janie had children, because if she had not had children, you wouldn't even know who I was. Nobody would be entitled to my fabulousness. How about that? That's a true saying. When whoever's on the face of the earth, God has already ordained them to be on the face of the earth. So I just thank God every day, because by the rest of them not having any children, once they died, that would have been the end of Jack Johnson and his family. That would have been the end of us. So it's still a few of us left here. I'm the oldest one, by the way, the oldest one. That's amazing.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit, how did you learn of the story of your famous uncle?
Well, my mother it was four of them from Luella. So my mother's brother, because my mother's the oldest, then it was her sister, then it was her brother. His name was Augustus. He was named after his grandfather. So we called him Uncle Sonny for short. That was his nickname. So once I was 12 years old and I was in the apartment, because I grew up in a housing project, Robert Taylor Home. So I was pretending to be boxing. I don't know what made me do it, just a silly child. And so he said in a real low voice, almost a whisper, while I was boxing, he said, "Do you know that you have an uncle who was the first black heavyweight champion of the world?" And I couldn't understand why he was whispering. And I said, "Huh?" So he said, "Your uncle, you have an uncle who was the first black heavyweight champion of the world." So I stopped in my tracks. And so my mother was across the room. I said, "Mama, what is he talking about?" And she just kind of like grimaced. And I came to realize later why she grimaced, because I said, "Well, what did he do? And where is he at? And what happened to him?" I asked her all of those questions, and it was so painful for her to answer. And I found out later the reason they never talked about him is because he had gone to prison. And that brought such shame on them. But she told me that he went to prison while I was asking her questions. And I said, "For what?" She said, "The Mann Act." I said, "Well, what's the Mann Act?" She said, "It's for transporting prostitutes across state lines." That's how she explained it to me. And I said, "Oh, wow, that's terrible." And subsequently after that, I tried to get as much information. I went to the public library. It was a library not too far from me. And I went into the library and I was trying to find some books on Jack Johnson, because she was only limited in what she could tell me. They never really talked about his boxing records. They talked about how he interacted with the family, things he did for the sisters and his brother and his mother and the nieces and the nephews. That's what they talked about. So I have a lot of information about how he interacted with the family and his sisters. But this is a real important part. The first book that I read about him was called Black Champion, and it was by this man called Phineas Farr. And at the time, you could check books out for 3 weeks at a time. So they never saw it again. Took that book and I kept walking. And that's when I was 12 years old. And so now that would have been 52 years ago. I'm telling my age. That would have been, man, I guess they still looking for that book.
I don't know what the fine is on that library book today, but we might have to make.
God. What was it, 10 cents a day for every day? No, I'd have to work for the Federal Reserve to pay them back.
But it was so important to learn that history about your.
Yeah.
What other stories did your family tell you about him?
Well,
after they started talking about it.
Well, the stories, because this is important to note, the stories that were told about him came from his oldest sister, Lucy. And Lucy would talk to my mother, because my mother, by her being the firstborn child of her niece, Luella, she would talk to my mother. And Lucy actually lived until she was 92 years old. And I've told this story. My mother said she took a shot of whiskey every day and she smoked a corncob pipe. Now, I saw her, because she died when I was almost 7 years old. So I saw her. She was tall and thin. She wore wire rimmed glasses and she didn't talk much. But whenever she talked, it was very powerful what she said. So she would tell my mother all the things that Jack did and what they did. So one of the stories she always told, because people wrote that Mama Gilmore and all these different people taught him how to fight. That's not true. That is not true. My mother told me when I was a little girl, like I said, that his sister Lucy is the one really, I don't want to say she taught him to fight, but he was actually bullied. And people may find that hard to believe, but he was actually kind of scary, and he was a little skinny boy. And Aunt Lucy said that some of the boys would beat him and run him in the house. And that happened 2 or 3 times. And so Lucy finally, I guess, she knew that at first she didn't know that that's what was happening. And so she found out and she took him outside to face one of the boys that was beating him. And she said, if you don't whoop his so-and-so, I'm going to whip yours. That's the old-fashioned way. Yeah. And he had to fight because he'd rather beat the bully than get beat by Lucy, because he did talk about in the book how Lucy would always come and find him. He said wherever he was at, he said, I don't know how my sister knew where I was, but she would always come and get me. So that's one of the things. She actually stopped him from being a coward. And once he knew that he could throw some punches and get some results, as they say, the rest was history. So that was one of the things that she told. Another story that she told my mother is that when they first came to Galveston, my mother back then when they first came to Chicago, I'm sorry. Back then they called taverns, they called them speakeasies. Did you know that?
Yes, ma'am. I had heard that term before.
Okay. My mother said Lucy told her that her and Fanny, because Fanny used to drink like a fish. And I can tell you that. I heard stories of how my Aunt Fanny used to be toasted. And so her and Lucy found a bar, and Lucy, knowing her brother had money, she bought drinks for everybody in the bar. And my mother and uncle told me this story repeatedly. So I know it's got to be true because Lucy told it to them. And she bought drinks for everybody in the bar. And the tab went up to $1,000. That's a lot of money now. Yeah. Now. So you can imagine what it was like back then. And they were just drinking and laughing and dancing and my brother gonna pay the bill. And at first didn't nobody know who her brother was, but the bartender just kept sending the drinks. And some kind of way he got wind that Lucy was in there buying everybody drinks. And Lucy said her brother came in there, and when the bartender showed him, this is what you owe, and who bought it, Lucy said he hit the roof. He exploded. All day. She said that she thought her brother was going to give her a couple of fisticuffs. Yeah, but my Lucy said that after he went off on her and he told the bartender, you better not give my sister another drink. If you do, don't look for me, because my mother said he paid the bill because he didn't want the embarrassment in behind it. But can you imagine that? She running up $1,000 bill. They was something else. They was something else. Man, my mother used to tell me all kind of stuff that they was doing to that man. About his money. And
then the family, I had an opportunity to come to Chicago, and you took me out to the grave site there.
Yes.
What is it, Graceland?
Yes, Graceland Cemetery, 4010 North Clark.
So he's buried there, but he bought plots for the entire family, correct?
He bought 28 graves. And funny you mentioned that, because I asked my mother at the time when my uncle first told me, I said, well, did he leave us any money? I was smart enough to ask that. I said, did he leave us any money? And she said, no. I said, well, did he leave us anything? She said he bought 28 graves in Graceland Cemetery. I thought, well, okay.
That were not even 28 family members at the time. He just bought up a big space.
Exactly. And that was intuition. That was intuition. And listen, I need to also say, at the time he bought the graves, because he bought them September 30th, 1912. He bought the graves after his first wife killed herself, because she killed herself September the 12th. So he bought the graves on the 30th in 1912, September 30th, 1912. But he at the time, you could not get into an all-white cemetery if you were Black. And at the time, there were no Blacks in Graceland Cemetery, but because of the fact that he was rich and he was famous, that's how he was able to buy the plots because I have the cemetery record that shows this lot, because it's Bellevue 430. That's where the lot is Bellevue 430. And it shows on the card, this lot was purchased by John Arthur Johnson, September 30th, 1912.
So a few years ago, Ken Burns did a documentary, Unforgivable Blackness, and then
Yes.
all of the stories started coming out about your uncle. And I know you fought very hard to get the
Yes.
pardon. Could you tell us a little bit about when you started traveling and getting involved to try to speak up for the family and let people know that
Yes.
you're the only family that is directly connected by blood through a sibling that is known, documented, because you have all the records as you just shared
Yes.
with us, your mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and the connection. But
That's
when you
correct.
got involved, could you tell us a little bit more about why it was
Yes.
so important to get that pardon?
Well, it always bothered me in my spirit, even though the members, they never really, because they carried that shame. Now, once I began to read about him, as things started coming out via the internet, and I read about his character, his behavior, along with the stories that my mother told me about how he, regardless of what his sisters did, my mother said he always provided for everybody, that he would send her grandmother, my great grandmother Janie, he would send her money. He would send her money all the time. She would send him a Western Union telegram. And when he was in town, he would pay their rent up for months at a time, send them money for clothes, for whatever it was. So my mother always stressed to me that he took care of his family. So the first time that I really started doing something about this pardon is when Ken Burns wrote that, well, when he made that film. And because once he made the film, I didn't know that he made the film. A cousin of mine came to my house, and because it was in Jet magazine, and I had been hearing and reading about people doing all kind of stuff in Jack Johnson's name, but I didn't really know how to verbalize it or vocalize it or put it out there that he's got family members. So anyway, when he wrote that, when he made that film and the book was out, I called his office, in fact, and they thought I was calling to buy a DVD. And I said, no, I don't want a DVD. They said, well, who are you? You want to buy a VHS? I said, no, I don't. And so the lady said, I think her name was Pam. And she said, well, what do you want? I said, well, I'm Jack Johnson's niece and I'm in Chicago and I want to speak to Ken Burns because I don't appreciate him making a film and him not contacting a family and like we don't exist. So I gave her the business for about 2 minutes. So she said, well, hold on a minute. Because I thought he was coming to the phone because I was getting ready to go in on him. He never came to the phone. She must have told him there's an irate Black woman calling from Chicago. She must have told him something because he never came to the phone. So she came back to the phone and she said, well, we're going to have someone to contact you. I said, yeah, you do that. So the producer of the movie named Paul Barnes, he sent me a 3-page apology. He sent it to my email. I still have it. I'm so sorry. We didn't know how to contact you. We didn't know if it was any relatives left, and that was a critical lapse on my part. What he did was expound on some BS because I told him in another email, all you had to do was call Graceland Cemetery. They would have told you that Jack Johnson got living relatives, but he sent me an apology. And so from that point forward, it got out that Jack Johnson got family members and people started actually calling Ken Burns' office trying to look for me. And that's how the pardon became, because it was other articles in the Jet magazine. This boxer named Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, he was talking about my uncle like he knew him. So he left a phone number. I called him and I chewed him out. You know, I called you too because you wrote a story. I was calling everybody, letting them know, hey, we are here in Chicago. You're not going to keep acting like we don't exist. So from those efforts, people started contacting me. And one of the people that started contacting me, name is Rayman Sarah out of El Paso, Texas, because they were all trying to help me get this pardon. And then in 2009, Senator John McCain actually sent for me and my mother and my sister, and we met him at the in April of 2009 at his Senate building in Washington. And that's when he was still trying to help get the pardon. So I was talking to these people, I was writing letters, I was making phone calls, I was sending emails, because once it got started, then I wanted to carry the momentum, because it always bothered me that he was listed as a convicted felon when all he was doing was taking his girlfriend across state lines. And my Aunt Lucy and my great grandmother, my mother's grandmother, they told her that when the federal authorities were running after him, and he was, because first he was in Chicago, he was trying to hide, and they was hounding him and hounding him and hounding him. And so my mother said that they were all in the house together talking about it. And my mother said that her grandmother told her that he became so overwhelmed and so distraught that he broke down crying. He was just hysterical. And and that bothered me. Even though he was dead 10 years, but to know that a man this great and this famous got beat down like that, I cannot imagine the toll that it must have took on him, because everybody got a breaking point. But my mother said he put his head down and he cried and he cried and he cried. That had to be a terrible feeling. And so he ended up, leaving the country. But we all know now that it's because he was rich, he was powerful, and because the Caucasians really liked him. They really liked him. So that's how I got involved. I got involved because people started calling me to help me with my efforts to get the pardon. And it started with Ken Burns. Well, the family knew that was wrong, but it was nothing we could do, because my mother had already told me that it bothered everybody, but it was nothing that they could do at the time.
Now, his mother died while he was out of the country, correct, in 1918?
Yeah, she died in 1918.
And then so the pardon came in 2018. So
yes, May 24th.
Yeah, May 24th, 2018. You had an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and represent the family. You want to tell us about that experience, a little bit of actually, after all of this hard work, finally being there when the pardon, I know it's on YouTube, but for those tuning in that haven't seen it, kind of tell them how that made you feel representing the family.
Wow. Listen, at one point, there was this guy who they had been talking about it anyway, but I didn't know that they were talking about it. So when Donald Trump, because he tweeted it in April, he tweeted, I heard his story. Sylvester Stallone called me with the story of Jack Johnson. I heard about it. I've been thinking about it. I'm considering a full pardon. So when he tweeted it, I knew nothing of the tweet. All of a sudden, I'm in a gas station in Chicago. I'm just sitting in the car getting to it. My phone started blowing up. People were calling my phone, reporters, people I had met along the way. Miss Haywood, did you know? Blah, blah, blah. No, I didn't know. President Trump, he gonna probably get, no, how do you feel? Well, my mother always told me, she said, don't believe nothing till you see the whites of their eyes. That's what she always told me. So people kept saying, well, how do you feel? He's probably going to give him a pardon. I said, well, if he's going to give him a pardon, that's fabulous. That's wonderful. And so this guy named Miguel Taruco, yeah, that's his name, Miguel Taruco, he started messaging me on Facebook saying, I'm looking for relatives of the champ. I have good news for relatives of the champ. Are you a relative of the champ? Your name keep coming up. So I said, yeah, I am. Why do you ask? He said, well, I want to call you. So he called me and he said that they were going to do a pardon for my uncle. I said, well, how do you know this? He said, because I am very good friends with Stallone. And Stallone told me that Trump is going to do the pardon, but you must not tell anybody. And so, listen, this is all I do. This is who I am. I talk. So for you to tell me I can't tell nobody, you might as well throw me in jail. You might as well slap the cuffs on me. You might as well put a muzzle over my mouth because I've been talking ever since I could talk. But now you telling me be quiet? Shh, don't say nothing. That was like somebody sticking pins in my eyes, Sam Collins. So anyway, he told me, he says, Stallone is going to call you. I didn't believe him. I said, yeah, okay. He said, no, Stallone is going to call you. And sure enough, Stallone called me April 5th, 2018. I still got the voice message on my phone because at first he could not get me. And he left a message on my phone. He said, hello, Linda, this is Stallone. I will try. I hope I got the right one, but I will try to call you back later. And I still got it on my phone. So he finally got me because he was calling me private. And he told me, well, we're going to do it. We just going to get the date. So sit tight. So then the White House emailed me an invitation, told me you're going to be coming. They emailed me the tickets and they said, you can bring one guest with you. And so I said, well, I'm going to bring my daughter because I tried to bring one person every time I went out traveling. So I brought my daughter. We got to Washington. They didn't let her come to the ceremony. She was so upset, but that's another story. So we walking to the White House. And it's like I was in a dream. I was just walking and walking. I was looking at the ground. And let me tell you one thing about going into the White House when you go to see the president. I don't know how it is for everybody else, but they took me through so many little catacombs. We walked for about, I want to say, probably a good 10 minutes. So anyway, we got to the, there was another room that we were all waiting in. So it was me, Sylvester Stallone, it was Lennox Lewis, it was Deontay Wilder, it was everybody that was there, the president of WBC. So we waiting in another room because the president was having a conference with somebody about Korea. That's when the stuff was going on with Korea. So he was in there with them. So we were in there about a good hour. And then after he finished the press conference, they had us come in and we all sat down and I sat right next to him. I sat actually to his left on the sofa. And so he was talking, he was making like small talk. And then we got ready for the ceremony. So when we got there, and my daughter had texted me and said, Mom, can't you get some pictures? And I think either you texted me or you called me, you said, don't you have some pictures? I know I spoke to you about the pictures. That's when I started sending the pictures. I asked Stallone, would you take a picture with me, and Lennox and Deontay? So I was taking the pictures with him. And listen, when I got to the White House, I got to tell this, they had prepared a document for Trump to sign, okay? And he was reading it. He was reading it about, what he did and his accomplishments and this and that. So I happened to look over because I was standing to his right. So I looked over, my name was nowhere in that document. Now, you done flown me up here, put me in a hotel, but you're gonna act like I'm not here? I'm the only Black woman in the room with all those men, but you want to make it about Sylvester and I wasn't having it. So when I saw that my name wasn't on the document, they had already started recording. And the little photographer, her name was Jennifer. She had to get up on some type of little step or whatever. They had started recording. I was so upset when I didn't see my name. I stopped the whole ceremony. I held out my hand. I said, excuse me, excuse me. And everybody froze in the room, even the photographer. And I said, I'm looking at this document and my name is nowhere on this document. How are you going to bring me here to stand and represent my uncle, but you don't put me on this document? And immediately I said, who wrote this document? And his lawyer, his name was Kenneth somebody, he had his arm folded, but he froze. He froze. I said, who wrote this document? Because I was kind of like, I said it like that. I said, who wrote this document? And he kind of like flinched. He said, I did. I said, and who are you? He said, I'm his lawyer. I said, well, you need to rectify this. Now, I couldn't see what everybody else was doing because I was so angry and I was so focused on the lawyer that wrote the document and didn't put my name in it. So I had talked to Lennox Lewis later when we went to the Ukraine with the WBC, and I asked him, I said, when we were in the White House and we were speaking and I stopped and made everybody freeze to acknowledge me, I said, what were you all doing? He said, we were nodding our heads in agreement. He said, we were in agreement with you that your name should have been on that document. I said, well, will you say that on camera? He said, absolutely not. I guess he wasn't going. He said, absolutely not. But he admitted it to me when we was in the hotel in the Ukraine. So when the lawyer beckoned for somebody to give him a piece of paper. And if you look at the whole video, you will see Donald Trump. You will see him look to his left and he's got a white piece of paper because I wrote my name on it. And he said, and we have here Linda E. Bell Haywood, the maternal great niece of Jack Johnson. Had I not spoken up and made them stop and check him, they would have kept on talking like I wasn't even there. So that piece of paper you see him reading from, that's because I made them acknowledge me. You're not going to bring me down here and act like, no, I wasn't having that. Only little black woman in the room. Huh?
We have about 5 minutes left in our interview. And
did we cover everything?
Yeah, we covered just about everything. So I just want to kind of wrap up in summary. You get the pardon, the family celebrates. It was news all around the world. I mean, it was front page all around the world.
Yes.
And, so did your life change when you got back to Chicago?
Well, I had hoped that it would. I was made promises by people they were going to help me get a foundation. They were going to help me do this and that. So one person in particular, but I'm not going to call them out like that. I'm going to just treat it with respect. Yes, made a lot of promises to me, didn't deliver on any of them. Even when I spoke to the individual in person and said, what about this, that? So he did nothing. Now, what I think, my life didn't change other than the fact that people were still inviting me to come and speak, as they started doing once they found out about the. Actually, I started traveling when Ken Burns first made the movie. I had been traveling since 2005, truthfully, where people would invite me to speak on his behalf and induct him in this hall and that hall. So I was
just to back up on that. You went out to Reno when they had the 100-year anniversary. Correct?
Yes, that was in 2010. Yes, and the Mills Lane family, the referee, the famous boxing referee, the Mills Lane sons, Thomas and Terry Lane, they flew 5 of us out there, treated us like royalty. We didn't have to pay for anything. And that's how I've been treated all along. Even when you brought me to Galveston a couple of times, and Doug Matthews, people have shown me the utmost love and respect. They really have, and for that I'm eternally grateful.
When you
however,
when you came to Galveston, that was the first time that anybody from the family had been back to Galveston, correct?
That is correct. And nobody's been there other than me. And I always wanted, because my mother told me that we all came from Galveston, and I always wanted to see it, but I never had the money. I never had the means or the money to get there. So I've been to Galveston 5 times, 4 times on your dime, once on Doug Matthews. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So, but to summarize, I thought my life would change for the better, especially by people making promises to me. I think one of the main reasons that it didn't really change is because of the president that gave the pardon. Because people, they pretty much hate him, especially Black people.
They couldn't separate the two things.
That's correct. That's correct. But I do feel and believe, had Obama done it, because I really thought that he was going to do it, and the other people that were rallying behind me, they really thought Obama was going to do it, and he never. Actually, he refused. From the information I got, he refused, but he didn't give a reason why. I think had he done it, I do think that doors would have opened. I think that my life really would have changed, because he was very much respected and admired. He still is respected and admired, but he's out of office. But because of the fact that Donald Trump did it, nobody really can, like you said, they can't separate the two. And the few people that do support him, they thought that it was a good thing, because I read on the internet that they thought it was great. I think it was great too. I'm just happy that it all came to an end. And if my uncle is able to look down from heaven, I'm sure he is breathing a sigh of relief, because he applied for a pardon in 1920 from President Warren G. Harding. I just found that out. And Harding was about to do it, and somebody stopped him because they made allegations against him saying he was abusive to women. But Warren G. Harding, to my information that I have, was actually going to give him a pardon, because my uncle applied for it himself.
Wow. Well, the family, we thank you for representing the family today. We thank you for speaking up when you were in the White House to make sure that they did not bring you there just for a photo op.
Yes, but, and that really happened. That really happened. I stopped them in their tracks.
And I don't know, I think I may have shared with you, but prior to the pardon, the Bryan Museum also did a letter writing campaign where we sent hundreds of signatures to the White House asking for the pardon too. We like to think our Galveston locals played a little bit of that a part.
I saw some of the letters that were sent. Yeah, you sent them to me.
Yeah. So the Texas Sports Hall of Fame, the mayor of the city at the time, the district attorney here in Galveston, all gave letters of support for the pardon. We have all of those, and we were finally able, after 105 years, I believe.
Yep.
So we are so thankful to have this time with this interview with you. We thank you for taking the time this morning. And
of course,
on behalf of the citizens of Galveston, Galveston County, all of Texas, as big as we are, we say thank you. We say thank you.